10 years at Ready Readers, I realized that I was looking at these literacy rates, realizing that we have amazing programs in St. Louis. We have amazing teachers in St. Louis. We have money here in St. Louis. We know how to teach children to read, but they're not reading. So a little over a year ago, I, along with a board, including Julius Anthony, we started a chapter of the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading. It's called Turn the Page STL. We're really just getting started. But as a chapter, this is a framework that came out of the Annie E. Casey Foundation about 15 years ago in Washington, D.C. And there's about 200 chapters across the country. And now St. Louis has one. And we are working to align all of our great programs and to bring in national resources in order to combat the illiteracy rates here in the St. Louis area.
Thank you. Julius?
All right. Good morning to everyone. And as Lisa shared, we do want to say thank you, Charles, for inviting us to have this really, really important conversation. Again, my name is Julius B Anthony. I'm the president and founder of St. Louis Black Authors of Children's Literature and the Believe Project. I'm a native St. Louisan, grew up in the 63106 zip code area, attended Dunbar Elementary School. That's where I graduated from. So I'm a product of the St. Louis public school system. Graduated from Metro High School as well. You know, that's a St. Louis thing. You have to say your high school. But I grew up in a community of very loving people. But it wasn't until I became an adult, attended Howard University, became an educator myself, when I realized that the community I grew up in is grossly underliterate. And so this issue that we're talking about today is not just a today issue. It has been a generational issue for the region of St. Louis. Black children, Black people in this region have never been fully literate. And particularly since the advent of the Great Migration from the South to St. Louis is one of those migration destination cities. And the educational system here has never fully educated Black people here. So I've been an educator for more than 20 years. I primarily have worked in the early childhood elementary space. I have primarily worked with Black children and Black children who are growing up in communities of poverty. And I've seen Black children struggle with reading in every setting. I've been in a private school setting. As you know, Charles, you were one of the parents in the private school that I was part of. And no matter what setting I was in, Black children struggle with reading. The other thing that Black children do is they don't seem to have a real connection to what the school system says that they should be reading. And to me, that's an issue that we really should look at. That's an issue that we should really consider, because I think when any human being connects to reading, to text, to literacy, then you have a tendency to then fall in love with reading and be more willing to read. And so that's what our organization is attempting to do. St. Louis Black Authors with our Believe Project is really trying to make sure that all children essentially become confident and competent readers by the end of third grade, as it relates to the research that we know about third grade reading success.
So let me set some framework here based on definitions. So we talk about this. What is meant by the term literacy?
So we define literacy based on what our national professional organizations in that space, how they define it based on research. And so in terms of our organization, we look at the International Literacy Association, which is the premier organization for those of us that work in the literacy space and for public and private education. And they define literacy as having 6 elements, and that every person should have definitive skills in these 6 elements. And they are viewing, speaking, listening, visual expression, reading, and writing. And that it takes all of those things to be fully literate. Now, when you're considering reading, that's something, it is an element, and then there are some elements for reading that you have to develop in terms of skills, and there's 5 of them. But just in terms of literacy, literacy is more than just reading and writing. It's how we view things and the images that we see. It's the way that we speak and articulate our thoughts. It's the way that we express ourselves as well.
So when we talk about measuring literacy and functional literacy, all of those elements combined, a child should have by 3rd grade?
Well, there's certain skills that we want children to have acquired by 3rd grade. And we want them to have them, these particular skills by 3rd grade, because that sets the stage for them to do well throughout the rest of their educational pursuit. So they don't have everything at 3rd grade. What they have to have are the foundational principles by the end of 3rd grade. Now, the way that our American education—
Let me stop you. Why is 3rd grade so important?
Because
and you all can jump in. I don't.
Yeah, and I don't care. Do you want to take that?
I was going to say, in our educational system, teachers teach children how to read through 3rd grade. And then after 3rd grade, children are expected to read to learn. So you're learning how to read. And then when you enter 4th grade, the teacher assumes you can read. So then you're going to be learning text. And why 3rd grade? There's absolutely no reason, but the assumption is that by then a child can read to learn.
Right. And by then you're supposed to have all of those foundational skills, the things that I didn't talk about, like a solid base of phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the study of sound. Sound is the basis for our entire literacy or communication system, that you have those skill sets. And phonetics, phonological awareness, phonics, that you have a good sense of vocabulary development and how to study words. And then comprehension, you understand a body of text and what that body of text means. And so you're supposed to have all of those foundational skills by the end of 3rd grade. And if you have them, then the assumption is when you hit 4th grade, you're able to draw off of those skills and be able to read to learn at that point.
And also don't forget, that's when we really first test. We're going to talk about this today because it's a messy business, but this is the first time we test all children in Missouri, and I believe in the country. In Missouri, everybody's given the exact same test. And so you're, for the first time, really looking at all children equally or unequally. We can talk about that, but that's the first time we're looking at everybody at the same.
So
level.
if I don't have this foundation at 3rd grade, is the assumption it's now harder for me to, I'll use Julius's term, acquire knowledge after? I mean, is there a way I can catch up, or am I kind of like too far gone? What help me understand that?
There is a way to catch up. You can continue to have practice in what we call those foundational skills. As a matter of fact, 8th grade is the next grade determinant or marker in terms of how literate you might be in life. But yes, you can catch up with continued study in those basic kind of skill principles. But typically in our American public education system, there's no time to do that kind of instruction. That's not how our learning system is set up. The expectation is that you're given text and that you'll be able to read it with understanding, and that you already have all of those principles. For instance, like sounding out a word, that you should know how to sound a word out to figure out what that word is by the time you get to fourth grade. That you should be able to take a vocabulary word that you don't understand and do word study, meaning look it up or look at the syntax of the word. And I know I'm getting really, really technical. But the point here is that if you don't have those kinds of agencies for yourself around learning, then what happens when you get into fourth grade is you start falling behind.
So how do I acquire this stuff? Because Lisa said something that I'm going to disagree with, but I'll wait. So how do I acquire this stuff by third grade? How do I get this knowledge or this information?
Well, we have a school system. That's what schools are for.
I would also say it starts at birth. Language starts at birth. So it's a parent tuning in, talking, taking turns with that baby, telling stories, using language, showing background knowledge. And it starts at birth with that vocabulary. We know children living in poverty. This is a statistic that the number is controversial, but it's true, more or less. Children living in poverty hear 30 million fewer words by age 3 than children not living in poverty. So they already start off with the deficit of hearing language.
Explain what that means. 30 million less words.
Fewer words. So if a child hears the word table, 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 that's 3 words. A child living in poverty, and we're talking person to person. We're not talking about television. We're talking person to person, fewer words. So that, think about this, when you're born in a home where there's 2 languages going on, right? A child immediately picks up both languages and becomes bilingual. Why is that? It's because when you're born, all of your brain is open to learning any language, any of the 2,000 languages in our world. But at some point, your brain starts to prune. It starts to strengthen. So I only learned English. My parents only spoke English. So that synapse when I was a baby got stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger for English. And all the other languages I didn't hear. So those synapses just pruned, went away. So now, if you're going to teach me how to speak French, it is nearly impossible. I could do it, right? But it's a whole lot easier when you're younger because those synapses. So what if you don't hear English? What if you don't hear words?
Right. And Lisa is right. And I want to take her example just a step further. All of us are socialized into language in our homes. And so whatever the language that we hear in our homes, that's the language that becomes a part of who we are. And it may not match what the school's language is or the expectation of the school. And so we may learn English, but we don't all learn English the same way because we're not socialized into it the same way. And so when we get to the school age experience, then sometimes we have to relearn some things. So your question was, how do children get all of these things by the end of third grade? It's complex. It doesn't come from one particular entity. It comes from, like Lisa talked about, the prenatal experience has something to do with it. It has to do with how you socialize into language at your home, in your home, but it also has to do with the way that our American educational system is set up and the expectations for learning in school.
Language comes naturally, but reading does not. Reading is something that has to be taught. So once that child comes to school, has that great vocabulary, that background knowledge, understands how what books are, how they go from left to right, they are primed and ready. And then the teacher actually needs to teach a child, as Julius was saying earlier, Phonological phonemic awareness. It needs to teach children how words are put together. English language is extraordinarily difficult language. I mean, the word pneumonia starts with a P. I mean, it's a very difficult language, but children need to be taught that. So it's a combination.
So how do we get to, Julius, you have a point? How do we get to 10% proficiency? What does that mean? And I know we're not going to solve the world's problems today, but why does some of that issue exist?
What the 10% proficiency means is that there are 10% of, and I'm assuming you mean 10% of Black third graders in the St. Louis metropolitan region. Only 10% of them were able to meet what the state said are the expectations and standards in terms of what we expect children to know and to have acquired by that time in English language arts, which would include reading. That's what that means. And so every public education.
Oh, wait.
Yes.
We're gonna walk through that because that was a lot.
Okay.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You just said 10% of young Black children in the region
Mm-hmm.
are not, or less than 10%, are proficient in reading.
No, what you gave was the proficiency percentage. Only 10% are proficient.
Only
90% are not.
So 90% of the young Black children in this third graders at third grade in this region are proficient.
Are not.
90% are not. 90% are not.
Yeah, so that's 9 children out of every 10.
9 children out of every 10 are not proficient in reading.
Basically, they say they cannot read.
Based on the third grade assessment, the MAP test, the Missouri Assessment Program out of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education here in Missouri.
Yes.
Is that test, I'll go to the extreme and come back. Is that test biased in any way, shape, or form?
Absolutely.
Why?
It is. Go ahead.
What are some of the bias characteristics it has?
Background knowledge. You just bring everything to reading is background knowledge where you, so if a rural state starts to talk about, or Julius, what do you call a couch? Sofa?
Yeah.
So in a child may only know the word sofa and comes to the word couch when reading. And then on top of it, doesn't have the strong language skills to decipher what that could be or sound it out phonemically. But also, you know what you know. You know, if you start talking about how the tractor sows the wheat, I don't even know if I said that correctly. I know very little about farming, but tractor sows the wheat. You might have no idea what that's talking about. And that's not assessing reading. That's assessing your background knowledge. So that's why it's biased.
And culture to some extent. And so it does have those biases, but what has been norm referenced are the skills. And we can the whole bias debate about assessment. But the fact of the matter is our children don't have certain basic skills to perform well on those assessments. And that's something that they should have, that they should be able to learn in a school environment. You know, so like Lisa said, if you cannot phonetically pronounce the words that are part of the assessment. If the assessment says read the directions and you can't read the words in the directions, then you can essentially take the test, right? And that goes beyond culture and bias. That's a skill issue. That's an issue of phonics and phonemic awareness, and maybe even a little bit of vocabulary development and word study. So, you know, I fall on the line that we've got to do better on the skill side. We can have a conversation about culturally biased assessments, and that is a conversation to have. It absolutely is. But where are the skills? Where are the basic skills?
So I am falling back on my previous experience as a dad. And so I bring a little bit of bias to this conversation. But it's striking that the amount, the number, the raw number of 90% is striking to me.
Yeah.
Because nobody's talking about it. We talk about saving schools here. We'll do this. We'll talk about saving schools, but we're not talking about saving the lives in the school. So I said that. I'll eat that one.
For sure.
But because, you know, one of the things you said earlier, Julius, which I believe is extraordinarily true, is you said generational. I will say multi-generational.
Mm-hmm.
So grandma may not be able, or grandpa, be sexist here, might not be able to read. Mom or dad may be functionally, you may say literate, you may say illiterate, either one, but that's on a functional level. But then you get into the skills that you all are talking about, they're nowhere to be found. And this has gone on, because it's generational, this has been going on for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And how are our school systems funded? How are our school systems? Personal property tax.
Right. True.
The entire funding of our public educational system is set up for those who have less to fail.
I would agree with that.
Set up for those who have to succeed.
But even, here's a striking point. It was part of that article by Jane Henderson from the Post-Dispatch, is even in wealthy schools,
Mm-hmm.
even in wealthy schools, school districts, young Black children still, now I would imagine that in those schools, they have extra resources for children who are behind. And yet still we have a problem. We have a deficiency, even in those schools.
And so now we can talk about cultural bias. That's where the cultural bias conversation comes in. But I want to throw this out to you, Charles, as well as your listeners around that 90% number. Consider this. The majority of that 90%, the majority of those kids that are part of that 90%, they are scoring at what's called the below basic level in reading. And so we have 4 lattices in our state: below basic, basic, proficient, advanced. The majority of Black 3rd graders in this state are scoring at the below basic. That should cause anybody a moment of pause. Hold your heart. You know, just think about that. And because that translates into everything else. You know, we talk about disenfranchisement, we talk about crime, we talk about the housing situation, we talk about all of that. All of that can be connected to those numbers and those experiences. And I want to say this as well. If you are an educator in school and you are a teacher, you don't even have to look at the math numbers. You're there every day with the children. You know those kids can't read. You know they can't. you know that they don't meet the expectations of the school as relates to literacy. And so we can have a debate about the map numbers, but when we talk about just the reality day-to-day experiences of children in school, it's unconscionable. And you're right, it's not being talked about.
And we pass those kids on to the 4th grade, to the 5th grade, and at some point, we know they're going to drop out.
Yeah, we know that. We already.
Or they graduate. I had an assistant superintendent tell me a few weeks ago that she's graduating seniors and they can't read their own diploma.
Okay, so we're going to move on from that one.
It's all shocking.
You know, it's a conversation that I believe Black people don't want to have. And part of that to me is somebody's got to be blamed for this. And nobody wants to blame anyone. And I use the word blame as sort of a catch-all, because I don't need to blame anyone. I need to fix it. But you know, whether we talk about the parents, we talk about the grandparents, we talk about the school teachers, we talk about the school district, no one wants to have that conversation, because then you're going to have to you're going to have to pick people out and say, to fix this problem, we need to do this, this, and this. Nobody wants to do that. And so we shun the conversation. And that's unfortunate. I'm just dumb enough to go ahead and do it. No. But so we know that there's a problem. We know that there's a problem. I brought you both on to talk about the problem, but also what are some, and I won't use the word solution because Lord knows we're far from solutioned, but what are some of the projects that you all are involved in to try and deal with this issue on a day-to-day basis? Lisa, if you want to
talk briefly about teacher preparedness too. So what I have observed through the studies over many years is that school districts have a certain amount of revenue based on personal property tax and some state revenue. And based on that, that's the pay that they give to teachers. And when you're a brand new, right out of school teacher, you might start out at a lower paying district, right? And you are green and you are learning, and you are also, especially in our predominantly African-American schools, you are white, woman, young, early 20s. And it takes about 3 or 4 years, some of us longer, to really, you can't learn how to teach in the classroom. You got to get with the children. You can't just study it and then go in. And by the time you get many quit, but many get a handle on how to be a good teacher, you leave for a better paying district. So we have a lot of young, unprepared teachers in our, and this doesn't, in our lowest performing school districts. So I want to just note that as I see a big problem, and we need to attract the best teachers to teach our kids that are struggling. And we do the exact opposite, right? If you have a patient that has multiple diseases, you're going to get the best doctor in there, right? We do the polar opposite in education, where we give the kid that has the most difficulty, we're looking at 20% of kids have dyslexia issues, we now know, based on brain science. And you give that young teacher the most complex issues, it's a setup for failure. So I wanted to jump in before we look at all the other factors and stuff that we're doing.
Well, one of the other things, at least I appreciate that because that's so true. One of the things that I would think, and I'll bounce this off of you all before we get to what your programs are, is the issue of early childhood education and sort of early childhood education / daycare versus being at grandma's house. And I have a note somewhere to myself about grandma does not have a curriculum. And so in order to deal with this, we really do need to look at universal early childhood education as a means to begin to change the dynamic. And one other thing I will slide in here real quickly is where's, I shouldn't say it that way. So let me change how I say it. The parents as teachers model works. We need to uniform that as well so that we give parents the ability as well as the understanding of how to teach their children, even if they may not have the language skills. And I know, having been trained on parents as teachers, what they possibly can do. So I'll slide that in there and say, part of the dynamic is we're addressing this at the back end as a crime issue, not at the front end as an education issue. And we can do better if we start with that thought of how do I work with 0 to 3 to get them educated, 0 to 5, 0 to 7, pick a number. How do I get them educated? Because it's a haphazard method right now. And we see the failure, but we don't acknowledge it.
And it's a huge trust issue, by the way, that has completely broken down primarily in the African-American community, with whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking about the school systems, whether you're talking about something like parents as teachers. I've even had the public library system. I've even had people say, I don't trust my neighbor. Yeah. There is these root causes that then just exacerbate all of these issues, and that trust factor is pervasive, and we need that's part of what Julius and I are doing, is to heal families and to heal neighborhoods and to heal communities and rely on each other, because you can't raise your child by yourself. You can't. You can, but you need grandma, you need services, you need pre-K because you got to go to work, right? You need all of that, and you're going to have to open yourself up, and it's hard. It's hard when you've been pushed down for generations.
True. So Lisa, tell us about Turning the Page St. Louis, which I believe came from a Kansas City initiative that you sort of embraced.
Yes.
What is that?
So as I said at the beginning of the hour, we were looking in St. Louis at what other cities, this was a few years ago, what other cities were doing to improve third grade reading proficiency rates. And we stumbled upon Kansas City that had gone, at that time, about 30% of their kids were reading proficiently by the end of third grade, and now they're up to about 50%. And so I said, we got a ways to go. Let's start something here in St. Louis. And so I, along with our board and probably about 300 or 400 stakeholders, this past year, did a big study, and we studied why our kids aren't reading. What are the root causes, and what are the factors of why our kids aren't reading proficiently by the end of third grade? And we really discovered that there were 5 major factors. And this is, one was kindergarten readiness, which we've already touched on a lot today. I'm a big advocate for universal pre-K in different settings. It doesn't necessarily need to be the school district. The other factor is teacher preparedness, which we've talked about. Are teachers prepared to teach children the skills of reading? The third factor is summer learning or out of school time learning. There's a huge summer slide, and I'm extraordinarily worried about our pandemic slide, rightfully so. The fourth factor is family engagement, and that goes back to that trust factor. That's the school's job, not my job. The teacher calls me only when my kid's in trouble. And the big fifth one, which is kind of why we're here today, is community awareness. We realize that in St. Louis, our community is not aware. They're aware of the crime, right? They're aware that we're building prisons, but they're not aware of those root causes that can prevent. And human beings have a hard time with prevention. We're better at fixing than preventing. But so that's our charge to the community, is to be aware, and that these are our kids. These are not school districts. These are children, and these children deserve the right. They deserve the right to be able to learn to read.
I'm going to ask you, touch on something real quick. Something that I've always thought about, because I've sort of been an advocate for year-round education. I believe that there's a better methodology to teach. But you very specifically mentioned the summer slide. Can you talk a little bit about that and the impact of having quality education during the summer might do for young children?
There's a statistic that's been proven over and over and over again that if children read 20 minutes a day over the summer, that they will not lose reading comprehension skills.
20, you said 20 minutes.
20 minutes a day. But what is happening is that our affluent families, what are they doing? They're putting their kids in these wonderful, great camps, or think about after school stuff, schools in our wealthier districts at 3 o'clock, you got to end school then, because you got violin practice, you got soccer practice, you got all these after school activities. Well, our kids in districts where those resources don't exist, and with families whose resources don't exist, if they're going home, parents are working, they're not getting that stimulus. And over the summer, it is such a long period of time that kids come back a grade or two. Julius probably knows better than I do, in the fall from where they were in the spring.
Or behind.
Because they haven't been using this. So I believe, year-round schooling would, with unions, I find that probably an impossibility at this point, but we need to fill that gap for all children.
Got it. Julius, I know you've got at least one, if not two, projects going on. Talk a little bit about what you're doing around literacy.
Sure. So our core project is the Believe Project. And essentially, as I mentioned earlier, the whole mission or reason for this project is to ensure that all children are confident and competent readers, but particularly Black children are confident and competent readers by the end of 3rd grade. Our strategy is, we believe that Black children's literature can be a definitive strategy for Black kids becoming successful readers, because it's all about connecting to the things that you are expected to read. And what I have learned in my experience as an educator is when kids find reading materials or books where they can see themselves in that work, then they're more willing to read those books. And research backs that up. So what the Believe Project does is, we go into schools and we create what we call literacy labs. And those labs are designed for children to build all of those 6 literacy skills that we talked about earlier, but to build it in a way where they're guiding their own agency around that learning process. So this is not a time for teachers to teach explicit reading instruction. This is an experience for young children to go into a space and just be saturated with literacy-based experiences. At the core of the space are the books. We put at least 1,000 books in every space. 80% of those books will be considered Black children's literature because all of the communities that we're in right now, they serve Black children. We're looking at the 8 Promise Zone communities, and so that's where our work is currently. Also in those spaces, we make sure that there is what we call an inspirational and aspirational mural, where children are able to see themselves in that artwork. The characters or the people in those artwork, the children in them are life-size, so that children can see themselves in that way. It shows the diversity among children in terms of skin tone, dress, hairstyle, all of those things. And it also includes inspirational words. The other things that are in that space is the furniture. The space is set up like someone's home. And so it's all adult furniture. I should have said that this project focuses on kindergarten through 3rd grade. And a lot of times when you see programs that focus on that grade level, you see the kiddie furniture. Well, this space doesn't have that. This space has adult size furniture. And that's intentional because we want children to be able to build that connection in that space, that what I do here, I can do at home. That I don't need to go to only be here to learn how to read or to do literacy kinds of things. I can do these things at home as well. Because here's the thing with Black children in most school settings, they're told everything to do. Don't move until I say move. Don't open the book till I say open the book. Don't learn until I tell you to learn. And what we're trying to do is to disrupt all of that. That space is a yes space for kids. We train teachers to help them to understand what that means. That means they get to determine what happens in that space. We have a great partnership with 9 Network and PBS Kids, and they provide our core or anchor curriculum. It's called the Ready to Learn curriculum. Kids do a lot of experiential activities. They get free books. And what's great, even greater about that is every kid gets a free PBS Kids Playtime pad to take home with them. That Playtime pad is loaded with ebooks, literacy games, music, all kinds of literacy things, so that they can build a 24-hour literacy experience at school and at home. Our authors go into those spaces and do author visits. At least twice a year, kids get copies of their books. And then through our partnerships with folks like Scholastic and now Novel Neighbor, we're able to bring national authors into those spaces where kids can see authors who have written books that are in lots of schools that look like them and give them an opportunity to have a one-on-one experience with those authors. So the whole point here is we know the research that suggests when kids have access, or at least Black children have access to Black children's literature, they become more confident in themselves. What we're trying to prove is that that confidence translates into competency. And so that's what our work is all about. We're trying to change that 90 low literacy rate number by making sure that kids fall in love with reading. Because they're just like you and I. We choose books because it's a book I want to read. We think that we can connect to that book. And so
I go back to the thought of the parents. So you're doing all this loving on this child, but who's doing the loving on the parent so that you're bringing them along as well? Because if I feel neglected, you know, I ran in Peoria, I ran a youth center, and some of my staff at the time, they were angry, they were frustrated by what was going on in the home. And I had to remind them, the kids are only here from like 3 to 6. That's after that, they go home and literally everything that we just taught the kids can be shut out. So how are we engaging the parents in the processes so that they won't then say, well, whatever you learn there, that ain't what we do here?
Okay, good point. And so I have 2 answers to that. One is—
I have one.
The first thing is that children have to learn their own agency for learning, that you don't always need an adult to help you to understand the things that you need to do to learn. Our kids are smart enough to know that if I pick up that playtime pad, that's a learning experience. If I pick up a book, if I count the socks in the clothes basket, that's a learning experience. And you don't need an adult to tell you to do that. You can do that on your own. Now, as it relates to parents, we have created what's called the Believe Project Children's Show. And we did that really in response to the pandemic. And so we have this really creative show where the goal really is to reach out to parents and to make it attractive enough that this certain group of younger parents would like it enough that they will sit down with their children to watch it. And then we provide all these additional things for parents. So how do we do that? We reached out to those radio stations that really connect to that part of the community. We're talking about Generation Z and millennials that are part of the hip hop culture. So we went to the folks who attract them. And this show also features not just Black authors and their work, but it also features hip hop artists and hip hop artists that a lot of people in that community knows. And so that's a way to draw parents in, because here's the thing about parents. Parents will do if you just give them agency and access to do, or the knowledge to do. And so that's what this show is really attempting to do. It's hard to get parents to go into the schools, and there's a whole lot of conversation we can have around that.
Right.
And so I'm not going to even go into that conversation, but what I can do is to create something that might attract the parent. And if the parent is attracted to it, then they will also bring the kid into the experience as well. So I hope you get a chance to see our children's show. It's on 9 Network's YouTube page. Shameless plug for that. We piloted it last summer, and it aired actually on 9 Network for a minute, and we garnered a viewership of 12,000 households. So we were really excited about that. So yeah, that's our second solution around the parent issue.
Lisa?
It goes back to trust, though, with families. So you mentioned parents as teachers. You know, you mentioned, we could talk about public libraries. That trust is gone. And Turn the Page STL has been looking at a model in Philadelphia. It's called the Reading Captains model, where in the communities, it's like a Black captains thing, but a person who's identified in the community that you're serving, who has an unofficial leadership role in that community, becomes a trained and compensated reading captain. And they give out information that is truthful and trusting to families, whether or not this is a really great parent educator, you're going to want to have that parent educator, or this is the story time program at the library, it's free and it's so great for you, this is the reasons why. Or summer camps are important, or there's free pre-K in your district. So we're going to start piloting those soon, reading captains. So because that trust is gone, we've got to do it within the community.
How are you going to recruit parents, grandparents to be reading captains?
I've already got like a wait list of 30 people that have reached out to me. But it's just being in the communities where we are. A lot of connections are being made with our early childhood centers too, that see this as a crisis and that are run by people living in the community. And so that's kind of been the beginning, and now it has spread out where, I mean, families are concerned. Families are very concerned. Our role is to give them the resources, give them the tools so that they can help each other. I mean, basically, I know this is such a silly expression, but we need a village. And that village is broken.
Well, I do want to say this, because there are trust issues in every community. But yes, there are definitely trust issues in the St. Louis Black community. But the one thing that still exists that has always existed, there are families in those communities that reach out and make sure that everybody is taken care of. That element still exists in the Black community, even with all its trust issues. You have people who are working to make sure that everybody in the community is taken care of. They're not the people that you will get invited to a podcast like this. You know, they're the people that are at church, that go and work with youth every day, those older mothers that might reach out to the younger mothers. There's a lady in the apartment building that's trying to make sure every kid gets fed. You know, that work still exists in our community. And it's about connecting to those elements so that we can do something greater. We can help, you know, lift them up in the things that they do so that more things can be done. So I don't want anyone to leave this experience thinking Black folks are just so disconnected, they don't trust each other and everything is bad. That is not true.
It's just ways to which we have to re-engage each other.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Yeah, so we're almost at the end and I don't want to jump into something new. So Lisa, where's your Facebook page and how do people reach you if they have either questions or they want to volunteer?
Turnthepagestl.org is our website. My name's Lisa Greening, so my email address is the best way to get a hold of me. Lisa, Lisa .Greening, Greening, at turnthepagestl.org. You can also find us at Turn the Page STL on Facebook.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Julius B Anthony?
Yep. We're on Facebook, St. Louis Black Authors of Children's Literature. You can find us there. I also want to put in a plug for St. Louis Regional Literacy Association. We're doing great work in that organization. I'm the president of it, and I have to say this for legal reasons. We are a chapter of the Missouri Literacy Association, which is the affiliate of the International Literacy Association. If I don't say it that way, I'll get in trouble. So definitely check out our St. Louis Regional Literacy Association page. Lisa and I are collaborating on a project with them, trying to address the whole teacher preparation issue, looking at Black thought leaders, national Black thought leaders in the education space, bringing their voices to this region. We have 3 speakers this year. The first one will be Dr. Goldie Muhammad, who is the author of Cultivating Genius. She is the it person on the national scene in education right now about cultural relevancy in the classroom. She's our first speaker. Our second speaker is Dr. Rachel Washington from the University of West Georgia. And our last speaker, who I'm extremely excited about, is Dr. Stephen Peters, who is the president of the International Literacy Association. And his book is Do You Know Enough About Me to Educate Me? All great speakers. You can get in contact with me at stlblackauthors@gmail.com. And you can also visit our website at stlblackauthors.com.
Again, I thank you both for being here today. This is a subject that I probably won't let die. So, and if you all have anything that you all want to bring on, certainly get in contact with me and I'll get you some space on the podcast. But I really appreciate it because folk ain't talking about this, and as you both said, 3rd grade. So we've got work to do. I think we can begin to start a process, but we need more people involved and engaged in this. So again, I appreciate it. I will make sure you get the copy of this podcast so you can review it or laugh at it, whichever you choose. But I'm going to sign off and thank you all both for being here today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks.